wait for the slides. Wonderful. Can you skip on one more if that's okay? Thank you very much. And with that, let me hand over to Alejandra Rivera, the Global Program Manager for the Built Environment at the Institute for Human Rights and Business, to lead this panel and introduce us to the wonderful woman sitting with her. Alejandra, over to you.
Thank you so much, Katrina. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you all for the invitation. So good afternoon, everybody. I would like to start this roundup over here with these wonderful participants. So I'm honored to be here. So maybe if you can start introducing yourself and just tell us explain how climate resistant, resilience, and adaptation relates to your work. Maybe in 1 minute, really quick. So I'll start with you, Maria.
Great. Hello, everyone. My name is Maria Aguilar. I'm from Colombia. I'm one of the youth fellows for resilience at the UN High-Level Climate Champions team. And basically what I'm doing is support amplifying the stories on the ground. The resilience team has the Race to Resilience campaign, and we have a very ambitious goal, which is raising or building resilience and supporting that for 4 billion people by 2030. So I think at the core of adaptation and building resilience is the people on the ground, so we're trying to highlight their voices. That's a big part of it.
Yeah. Great, thank you so much. Now we go with Uli.
Hello, everybody. Thank you. I'm very glad to be here. I'm Uli. Yeah, that's my name. I'm from Big Field, born and raised. It's a new neighborhood in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. And there we have like 49% of the population. And we don't have the resource and the public policies that we need. So that's why I became an activist and graduate in public management. And now I work with social projects to understand how you can go work together and collaborate with youth, black and poor people, because that's the reason, and that's the people are more impacted. Nowadays, I'm project coordinator at Clima de Eleição. It's like election climate. It is a joke in Brazil, like clima is like vibes, so we make this joke. And we are trying in work in two fronts to construct public policies in climate and social environment. So that's it. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nasra Nanda. I am the CEO and ESG lead at the Kenya Green Building Society, where our aim and focus, especially as an established member of the World Green Building Council, we push for sustainability within the built environment. And we do this through our advocacy work, where we work with key stakeholders to push policy to ensure that we are catering to not just going green from the natural resources perspective, but we also want to expand the definition of what environment means, which essentially to me is also focusing on the communities which are affected by our actions as we build. And lastly, we also touch on the governance issues around that. So we want to make sure that our people are doing well and living in buildings that are safe, green, and also efficient. My other role, or my other hat, is that I'm also a member of County Assembly at the Nairobi City County Assembly. And I guess through that platform, as a politician, which I don't like to say, my aim is also to ensure that we represent these communities in a way that also reflects sustainability. So to touch on why climate adaptation and resilience is important, for those of you who don't know, Kenya is the climate change champion for Africa, and one of our key pillars through the new government is ensuring green affordable housing and also looking at climate change and climate mitigation as a key focus of our government. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you so much. And as you can see, we have a great diversity in this panel. I really like the fact that we're all women. also from the global south. Myself, I'm from Colombia, so we have like Colombia, Brazil, Kenya. So I love having like this diversity of perspectives that sometimes we don't get to have that space in this type of big conferences. So thank you so much for the space and the opportunity to speak about these. Just really quick to touch on what we do at the Institute for Human Rights and Business. We promote human rights for different industries, but specifically in the Built Environment program is how do we incorporate human rights principles in the way we think, design, finance, and construct cities and the built environment, how we make them more inclusive. So when we speak of climate resilience and adaptation, almost by definition, we have to put the most vulnerable people at the center of this decision, and that's what human rights aims to do. So our main question for today is how to make sure the voices of the vulnerable are heard when we're addressing climate resilience and adaptation. So big question, like where even to start. Maybe we can start unpacking this question a little bit, and perhaps we can start with you, Maria, maybe in 2-3 minutes each. Let's be brief. Will you tell us what are the main challenges and opportunities specifically for the youth?
So first, I think we have to change a bit of narrative. You know, youth are not only a vulnerable population, but we are also agents of change. We are being at the front lines of, climate ambition. The climate movement is actually being refreshed by youth. And I think this is so important to acknowledge. And what we need, which is a challenge but also an opportunity, is to strengthen access rights to participation, information, capacity building. So we need good information, timely information to be able to effectively be engaged in decision-making spaces. So I think that's my super key point. Access rights are crucial, are at the heart of, climate justice, and youth needs to be meaningfully engaged.
Okay. For me, I think the most important thing is to make sure that white, European, and everybody else are really listen, because sometimes we think we'd like to listen, but we cannot hear for truly. So I ask you to be open to understand, to listen, and to the government, I ask you to open your doors, make councils, make offices, and to the philanthropy, I ask also to make sure that the money arrive in the local movements, because sometimes we are in these spaces and we don't get the reality that's going on in the local projects. So, and when I think like challenge and some opportunities that I saw when I was there in my territory, is like we need to make our legislators always to open to listeners, because we don't have investment to guarantee the access to the less privileged. So I think this is one way. And it's also why in Clima de Eleição we are working in a front of social participation, because we understand what you said. We need to build capacities and to integrate our knowledges to make more people and more youth and black and poor people come together and think together to make public policies. So that's one thing that I understand. And I believe we need to improve our skills to like literacy with theoretical and practical in climate for our peers, something like this.
Yeah, just
Thank you so much. So in terms of opportunities and challenges, I think I'll start off with the challenges. When it comes to the challenges, one of the key things I have come to see is that we look at green or sustainable as something that the common man is not part of, or common woman for that matter. And a lot of the times when we think of sustainability, climate action, the words seem complicated, the processes seem complicated, and the conversations seem complicated. And for this reason, I feel a large set of the population is not involved in the process. And this is why then we don't have buy-in from communities. Because if a community feels, I need to have a degree, I need to be a scientist, then maybe this is not part of my problem. But if we break it down and say, if we have a cleaner street, for example, that means children won't have asthma. That's something someone can understand. And I think if we break it down to that level, more people feel they're part and parcel of that process and will then own that process and be part of the solution. So I think that is one challenge. The second challenge is, what does it mean to, for example, build green? A lot of the times we think building green means edge, means lead, means well, but essentially that's a rating tool that gives you the certification for it. But sustainability doesn't need to be that complex. It could just mean, are you using energy efficient lighting within your home? And that then involves more people into that. In terms of opportunities, I think we are at the cusp of a lot of very, very good ideas, because Africa is buzzing to involve young people in its solutions. And I think this presents an opportunity, because with 75% of Africa's population being under the age of 35, if we come up with innovative, creative solutions to this process, we essentially have, if we look at Kenya, about 37 million people, 3.7 million people, joining into this just in Nairobi alone. And utilizing the youth, utilizing women presents us new options or new partnerships that we haven't thought about. And I also look at collaborations, not just from politics or government with business, but I'd also look at community-based organizations, youth groups, as grassroots solutions to problems. So I think we have an uncharted path, and what we can do is run wild with it. And for me, that just means opportunity after opportunity. So thank you for that.
Yes, thank you so much. Yeah, thank you for all your very valid points. I think we are reinforcing the message on like that we need to change the narrative to switch from being vulnerable groups to actually agents of change, what you just said. And also thinking of what was mentioned in the earlier panel about the importance of universities and education and really mainstreaming sustainability, but also to your point, what is building green? And I think we have the capacity, we have some solutions on what that green means, but that attends only to the environmental sustainability. What about social sustainability? So I think these kind of conversations really opens the door to what that social, what that S in ESG really means. So I have also wanted to add from my side, also thinking of the situations that could inhibit participation, specifically in the workers industry. So we have like workers, you spoke a bit about the tenants on the housing side, but for the workers, especially the migrant ones, some things that inhibit this participation is their migration status or the power dynamics that might exist with their employees, or a situation of oppression. And the important thing that is also missed sometimes is that it is not only a problem of construction industry itself, but also down the supply chain. So thinking of the extraction of raw materials, or even when those materials get transported, so the cargo vessels, what are the human rights implications on that. So we have to kind of open the scope and see participation that is not only about women or youth or one group, but really all the community and throughout the whole supply chain, we can say. So what I'm seeing is like I wrote down some notes, and I think some of the key patterns, messages that we can say is that thinking about these different groups and all the voices that want to be heard, we can think that it's also a huge opportunity to leverage civil participation, to switch how we think about it, because we have the opportunity to improve human dignity, not only in the end product of the building, but also throughout the process, how we do it and who we engage in this decision making. But also from the perspectives of the companies, the developers, the architects. Through civic participation, we can avoid risk of the project delays or the project implementation that sometimes get delayed because we didn't account for these voices. So yeah, do we have many challenges? But I think if we just like flip the coin and look at what the huge opportunity of this could be, we can leverage it. So thank you all for for inputs. And now, if we look a little bit about towards the future, and maybe how to we move forward now for this other round. I would like to start with you, Uli. Maybe please give us your key takeaways from this session, also from COP, because we know that you're leaving COP right after. So just for these few days that you are here, what were your takeaways in this particular question, and maybe some next steps from your point of view, what is needed for further civic participation from local people?
Okay. Um, Actually, I'd like to thank the space first. I will take some notes because I made a list of these next steps. Here in Brazil, there in Brazil, we changed the government a month ago. So now we understand that integrating these groups from different realities, it is the most important thing we need to do, because we can share this experience and learning with each others to making noise and to change things. So for me, the next step that federal government in Brazil can make, it is recreate the climate change forum with a young working group, because we don't have this one. Um, Expand the support for more organizations to be represented in the political discussions, because nowadays we don't have this too much and we need this, and open more institutional spaces for social participation. For example, creating a climate action council at the national level. In Climateleção, we are helping to create a youth climate council in São Paulo, but we also need and understand the importance to hide this, to up this to the national level. So I think this is the next step. And to finish, I heard a sentence today, and it's like, we don't need to discuss the space. We need to, and we don't need to dispute this space. We need to expand the space. So when we get there, come and make more people fit. Because if we do this together, we are enlarge this space. So that's the thing to me.
Thank you so much, Julie. I mean, that's also a thing that I wrote down that we take, and it relates to what you were saying earlier of change the narrative. Don't dispute the space of civic participation. So sometimes people see us as a problem, or like the community opposing a project, so we need to stop them, but actually harnessing their voices on how we improve social sustainability through that. So thank you. You, Nasra.
Thank you. First, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us this afternoon. It's really nice to have such a passionate kind of conversation between the four of us. On my end, I think we need to redefine the way forward. I think the first thing I would say is, as the civic society or civic sector, we're not here to make noise. What we are here is to provide the vision to drive the strategy for government and business to grow. And I think if we create a path, especially, and I'm speaking of course from a Kenyan perspective where the market is reactive, by saying that we're going to drive the agenda and then bring government on board, it means then we can also look at what should be a priority and what could potentially be an obstacle. And then collaborate with like-minded organizations and groups who we think can help us get there quicker or more efficiently, and then provide solutions that are helpful to our people. And I really like the points around ESG, because I'm really passionate about ESG. I think there's no one solution to every problem. I think it's very, very important now for governments to redefine what they look at when they say investment. I think investment now should be for social needs, for environmental needs, to ensure that communities are not left behind, to ensure that any social issue is addressed as part of a core government agenda. And as civil society, we're there to ensure that it's done. If not by collaborating at the table, by pushing those conversations in forums like these. So thank you so much, I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Nasra. Yes, yes, applause that. Yeah, and think it's very important if we're going to talk about the future and universities. We have that topic now. Yeah, that's why I wanted to close with you on this question, because to me youth is so important. So what are some of the key takeaways there from your point of view, how we can further civic engagement with the youth particularly, because they're the ones that are going to be in the next 20, 30 years leading the industry.
Yeah, and we can call them the missing majority, because still in decision-making spaces, youth are missing, although we have right now 1.2 billion young people under the age of 25, and they're missing in the big spaces and even negotiations. You can see not many delegations have youth within their delegations. But I wanted to flag something that is super important, and is that, the IPCC 6 assessment report presented a very big red flag, and is that maladaptation is also increasing. And this is a result of the lack of inclusivity in, adaptation, in designing the projects, in including the people on the ground. So my final remark would be to actually Race to Thrive, which is the logo of the campaign. We're racing to thrive. We need, climate action that is truly inclusive, that considers young people for real, and of course that has a human rights approach to it. And I think this encompasses what we were all sharing, and is the need to include people, indigenous peoples, local communities, women, children, youth, the vulnerable, the poor, the displaced, the migrants, etc. Yeah, thank you everyone.
Thank you so much, Maria. We know you have to run, so thank you for making the time in here in the panel, all you as well, leaving. But I had some takeaways that I had written for myself. Please correct me if I'm wrong, or if you want to add something, also the audience. But what I think of some things that are like key is that this right to meaningful participation is really a cross-cutting right, as you have said. If we look at it from also my point of view, coming from the Institute for Human Rights and Business, it's a right that every single person has, and we cannot look at the civil society as separate from public, from private, from NGOs, universities, because we are all human beings. And when we finish our work of 9 to 5, after 5 we are citizens. We have a house, we pay bills, we want clean air, we want all these things that makes our cities better. So we have to look at everybody as inclusive as possible. So my thing to do that point. I also think it's very important to involve the entire community of actors, as you were saying, and from the early stages of any project, any intervention, anything that we want to do in the built environment. At the Institute, we have the concept of dignity by design, which uses the built environment life cycle as a footprint to really make that emphasis that since we're thinking and planning or designing, we need to think of these participation issues. Also, something that for me is very important is the continuity. Sometimes we think of participation as just a consultation for one specific project, or like ticking the box. It's like, okay, or informing even. Sometimes there's like this information that is sent, we're building this project and that's it, and the community cannot do anything about it or say or provide feedback. So I think it's very important to have or to invest in these ongoing instruments for participation that allow us to include the people not only for one project or one policy, but really on the long term for them to participate in the whole city. I'll say, yeah, those are the key ones. I don't know if you guys want to add anything else from the audience that maybe that I'm missing. Otherwise, we'll leave it here. But thank you all so much, and thank you for the organizers and for providing this space for this very important conversation. Thank you all.
Thank you so much. What an inspiring panel. I don't think there's very many times that you hear people getting a round of applause after everything they said, so thank you. A special shout out to Nazra, who turned up in the Blue Zone, I would say 10 minutes before this panel, and went straight on stage, so super impressive. It is now my pleasure to hand over to Amira for us to learn about sustainable reconstruction and resilience in disaster hit areas.
Thank you so much, Katrina. I'm very happy to now start the discussion about the sustainable reconstruction and recovery for the disaster hit areas. I would like to welcome our panelists. I would like to welcome again Mayor Manuel. Please welcome on stage. Also Dr. Salah Al-Hagar, the president of Egypt Green Building Council, and Sarah Bush. Welcome, Sarah. Sarah is a chief of staff at Building Change. Well, first of all, I would like to share with you a project that is close to my heart. So it's not like a framework or something that we published a few months ago at World Green Building Council. It is the Sustainable Reconstruction and Recovery Framework. And to give you a brief about it, this project is our Green Building Councils and UN Habitat worked on it more than 2 years ago. And it was funded by the EBRD. And to be honest, this framework is so much needed in the MENA region because we know that we have a lot of challenges happening. Climate change is already happening every day. We can see that starting from the clothes that we wear on different months of the year. We can see this on our communities that suffer each day from climate change. So the Sustainable Reconstruction and Recovery Framework is a holistic framework. It is not a one-size-fits-all. It is, what's very special about it is that it has this defining priority exercise. So we can start by defining what our project needs. Is it a climate disaster that happened? Do we have a water crisis? Is it a slum area? Is it an informal settlement? So the defining priority exercise is very important at the very beginning. So what is very important right now is that also our Green Building Council started to come up with training materials that can facilitate all stakeholders who are working on a sustainable reconstruction project. And we have the framework is structured around 6 thematic areas. And we will discuss this today with Dr. Salah as well. We have the efficient resource utilization, the environmental and climate resilience, the sustainable mobility, interactive social and economic resilience, health and well-being, heritage, and of course, the priorities setting exercise. So I would like to invite you all to go to our website and take a look at the checklist and the framework. I do believe that if this framework is integrated with our local rating tools, we can come up with a lot of interesting outcomes for our vulnerable communities. It is aligned with SDG goals, with our global projects at World Green Building Council, Health and Wellbeing, and Advancing Net Zero. So I invite you all to download the report and the checklist from our website. So I would like to welcome our panelists today, and I would like to start with Sarah. Sarah, how is resilience to disaster-hit areas different from general principles of climate resilience and adaptation we have talked about today?
Thank you. So yes, we've talked a lot about loss and damages at this COP, but for communities that are affected by disasters, those things are even more prevalent. And so while disaster resilience and climate resilience, the strategies don't really differ that much, for those communities that are also affected by disaster, the stakes are even higher because they're often dealing with this double burden. We saw in Dominica in 2017 that 90% of the housing there was damaged following Hurricane Maria. You have places like the Philippines where, because of their geography and where they sit in the ring of fire and also the frequent typhoons there, they can face things like typhoons, flooding, volcanoes, earthquakes. And so there are compounding factors that set back development gains in these communities when disasters strike and make it even more challenging to deal with some of the climate challenges that they face. And so when we're talking about loss and damage, what we try to do at Build Change is focus not only on building back better, but also helping to really prevent some of the loss and damages. So how can we strengthen homes so that when these disasters strike, families don't have to suffer? And the ways that we need to do that are by having better and stronger policies in place so that we can incentivize this sort of longer term thinking and also be able to support initiatives that allow for incremental changes to houses over time. We also know that we need to bring together governments and public and private partners so that we can have funding for this work. And then last but not least, we need to keep it centered around the people who are suffering the most. And so for those who are on the front lines of the climate crisis, having disasters strike can only exemplify the problems. And so we want to make sure that they're at the focus and the core of everything we do.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I think what you're saying is so much relevant to the importance of being with the people and understanding their needs, especially those who suffered from a climate disaster. Now my question to Professor Salah. Dr. Salah, you were involved in the developing of the Sustainable Reconstruction and Recovery Framework, and I would like to ask you, can you please take us through the key principles and how it can be used in disaster-prone and disaster-hit areas?
Okay, thank you, Amira, for this very important framework. I think this framework is a very important and very challenging. Contains 6 main opportunities, and I will give you some kind of snapshots of each opportunity and how to implement it. Because again, we have a major problem worldwide, and this problem is to use some kind of material with very low carbon footprint. And one of the opportunities is this sustainable mobility, and part of this sustainable mobility is pedestrian infrastructure. I always recommend to use recycled materials for the pedestrian infrastructure. Yesterday in this room, United Nations Environmental Program, they declared, and we have 100 billion tons of construction and demolition waste generated every year. That is over and above, what is accumulated over the years, which I'm sure it will be more than 10 times this amount. And therefore, we have a huge amount of construction and demolition waste all over the world. And I think it is wise to take this kind of materials and convert it into interlocks and curb, and do also the foundation for the pedestrian. That is number one. And number two, the buildings itself, it can be also constructed out of bricks made out of this construction materials. The technology is very simple. At American University in Cairo in Egypt, we have all these kind of technologies. Even we produce it, we already test it, and it has very strong mechanical properties and very cheap. And the most important part, the energy embedded materials is very low. And therefore, I think this is a very challenging to, construct the pedestrians, the paving the roads, and, constructing the walls of the buildings from materials made out of construction and demolition waste. And this is will also go into the second opportunity in this challenging sustainable reconstruction. To make it sustainable, you have to use this kind of low energy embedded materials, which is efficient resource utilization. Within the efficient resource utilization, there are 3 main elements: energy, water, and materials. Of course, this will fall under the materials, but in the same time, for the energy, we have to focus on energy efficiency, because again, if we try to focus on low cost solutions, this will help a lot, especially in the slum areas, etc. And for example, we should have a well-insulated building envelope, and this well-insulated building envelope is very important to reduce the amount of energy transfer during summer or during winter. In the same time, we have to have a high performance windows. I did it in my house. And again, I always say that, during the summer, I never operate the I have air conditioners in all my rooms, but I never operate the air conditioners more than 10, 15 days during the summer. And again, it cost me zero. It cost me zero. And that's a very important to have low cost energy efficiency systems. And this will reduce the amount of energy by 30 to 35%. That's number one. Number two, we have to have natural lighting. We have to have LED for lighting, and this will reduce the amount of energy quite a lot. At the same time, for the water, also we have to use water saving devices. Water saving devices can reduce the amount of water from 25% to 40%. In Egypt right now, we have almost about 10 15 case studies where we implemented the water saving devices with about 25% savings. In the United States, we have one case study developed almost about 3 years ago before COVID-19, saving 40%. And this is a very important to have all these kind of opportunities within the sustainable reconstruction to be very cost effective and low carbon footprint, and somehow reducing the energy embedded materials. Also, if we try to go into another item, which is the environmental and climate resilience, there is something called climate change mitigations. Of course, this will reduce the greenhouse gases because, again, building sector contribute with 40% of the greenhouse gases. And I think this is a very important to have this kind of framework to be implemented in a very sustainable manner. Thank you, Amir.
Thank you so much, Dr. Salah. I think what you said is very important to transform the energy of the situation to build back better. So instead of looking at our challenges, it's about transforming the challenges to opportunities, to think about all of the details Dr. Salah mentioned. If we are going to build for our communities, how we are going to collaborate with them and work with them hand in hand and see how we are going to build back better and consider every thematic key principles. So thank you so much, Dr. Salah, for sharing this. I would also I know that Mayor Manuel gave a brief about what's going on in Mozambique, but I would also like to ask you about the greatest natural disaster risks to the people and the built environment there, and how are you tackling them?
Thank you very much for bringing me to this very important panel. I think for the benefit of those who just joined, but also not to get tired, those who listen to my introductory remarks, I will just say that my city is Kilimani City. It's a coastal city, and because of that, it suffers a lot. Because of its geography, it suffers a lot from climate change, extreme events. In the last 10 years, we had more than 15 cyclones which passed through the Mozambican coast, and in general, the Mozambican coast is about 3,000 kilometers, so you can see the extent and how vulnerable it is to cyclones and so on. So one of the biggest extreme events is erosion, both coming from rainfall, but also coming from sea level rise. And the first line of defense that we use to protect my city are mangroves. So what we call natural-based solution. And so what we do, we run several projects where we educate youngsters. We create environmental clubs in schools, but also youth clubs in the locations and women clubs, where we train them and we inform them, we educate them on the importance of the mangroves and also on how to use alternative materials. The reason why people cut mangroves, first of all, is to build their own houses. They use the mangrove wood for construction. And when I was with the support of a project funded by the US government, one of the questions that people asked to me was, we understand why you are worried about mangroves, because mangroves are important because they protect our city, the first line of defense to our city, but second, because of the biodiversity potential, because like 6% of the citizens of my city, they live they get their living from fishing. And most of the fishes and other crustaceans, they reproduce themselves in the mangrove. So they understand the importance of them, but they're poor. They need the mangrove to build their houses. When I went there to convince them to stop it and so on, their question was very simple. Do mangroves vote? And as a politician, I got very frustrated. I mean, what do you mean by do mangroves vote? They are saying, it looks like, Mayor, you are more worried with the mangroves than with our livelihood. So the issue became, what are the alternatives? We understand the importance of mangroves, but you need also to worry about our livelihood. If we stop cutting mangroves, how are we going to cook our food? With what? Second, how are we going to build our houses? From then, I went home. Of course, I couldn't sleep. But those were very tough questions. They were saying, well, either you choose mangroves or you choose us. So we had to come up with an idea that will bring them together. First of all, was to explain them that though in the short run it was important, I mean, for them, it could be a good alternative to cut mangrove. In the long run, they will pay a higher price. They will not have enough fish to sell. They will not have income, and that will affect their well-being. That was one. But second, I needed to come up with a solution. And what I did was to engage with UN Habitat and World Vision to bring up a team of material engineers that could study local waste, as it was just mentioned here, which kind of combination of local material could be optimal and cost effective to replace the mangrove, because it needs to be viable. It needs to be sustainable. And then we came up with a project where we built with those materials, of course, in an experimental phase, 10 resilient houses. It was a mix of soil, of rest of material, like construction material from sites and so on. And while we are building these 10 houses, we brought in youngsters, carpenters, and builders to learn the technique of building these houses without using mangrove, but using this new kind of material. So we build them, and they're watching. And what we are trying to do now is to scale it up. So we are looking for partners and other institutions that could help us to expand that model. That was like one of the solutions we found. But for the energy, on the energy side of the equation, because they said, okay, we have got material to build our house, but what about cooking? We use mangrove to cook. Well, I had to come up with a university in Stockholm. When I went to visit, I shared this problem with them. So every year they send 2 of their master or PhD students to come there to continue experimenting on how to transform waste into gas. And we have got pilot projects in different areas of my city where we transform waste into biogas. And this is like, of course, it takes time, but people are seeing that there are alternatives, but we need to invest in those alternatives and come up. The fourth issue that is really worrying us is the lack of a regulatory framework, both in national and in local legislation, to induce builders to use alternative ways to construct. There are also, and this is the fourth, there is a lack of incentives. What are we giving to those who are opting not to use the mangrove, but to take the alternative route? So we need to work a package of incentives, be them fiscal or other kind of incentives, so to convince those builders who are willing to take this new path, so that we can slowly move into changing the way and the practice of building, but also of producing energy. We are also piloting projects to use wind and solar energy as alternatives to using mangrove to cut. But of course, we lack, as I mentioned, we are still looking for partners to improve the processes, to educate the people, and also to show them benefits. And I'm saying to show the benefits because at the beginning there is a lot of resistance for people for new techniques and new technologies. Just to share one example on the food waste side. When we started transforming food waste into compost, people were not used to using compost. So they didn't believe that it will work. We had to create what we called a demonstration camp. We divided the camp in 2 slots. One slot we will put plants without using compost, and on the other side we use compost. So they, with their eyes, they could see the difference on the growing, the speed and the quality of plants on the area where we are using compost. After seeing, it was easier to convince them that actually this is the way to go. And now they're queuing to come to get the compost. They started buying it. At the beginning, even when we were offering them, they were refusing. But today, they're willing to buy the compost because they saw through the demonstration camp how it works. So we need also demonstration camps in other areas so that people see that indeed the new technology that we are preaching, they do work. The houses are resistant and they are resilient. And like since then we had 3 cyclones and those houses resisted better than the houses built with mangroves. So there is kind of an embedded incentive for them to do. Now they are coming to us. So what we are looking is like resources to scale it up. So if anyone wants to join hands with us in the regulatory framework, in the incentives, or in the other area that I mentioned, we are willing, and I'm here up to the end of COP. We can talk and exchange more data and information about what I just presented. Thank you.
That's very inspiring and valuable, sharing the experience, creating pilot projects to transform the community and educating them about the importance of the health of our planet and how is this correlated to our health, so or our existence actually, not only to our health. So thank you so much, Mayor Manuel, for sharing this. We have few minutes left, so I have a question for Professor Salah, but I need an answer in just 2 minutes, and another one for Sarah. The question for Dr. Salah is, what are the next steps for the sustainable reconstruction and recovery framework, and how the principles that you shared with us can be scaled up across Africa and all over the globe?
I think this is a very important part. It will take maybe 2 minutes or 2 hours, but in brief, I will say in the national level in Egypt, we have a very important initiative by President Sisi called Decent Life or Haya Karima. Decent Life will cover, or Haya Karima will cover almost about 60% of the total population of Egypt, and all of them in the rural communities where the people are very poor. And therefore, we have to implement this kind of framework in the buildings of the Decent Life project or initiative, and this will save a huge amount of money. That's number one. Number two, we as Egypt Green Building Council, we developed a Tarsheet Haya Karima for the government, which is very cost effective. The total extra cost will never exceed 15,000 pounds. And when I say 15,000 pounds, that's peanuts, by the way. In terms of saving, we are going to save almost about 40% of energy and about 50% of water, including improving indoor environmental quality and also reducing the carbon footprint. And that's very important on the national level. In the global level, I think there is another project which will be presented this coming Monday called ROH, which is Roof Over Our Heads. It will be presented this coming Monday, and it will help 2 billion people all over the world. And I think it is very important to implement this framework in the ROH initiative, and this will help a lot to reduce our natural resources, to reduce our energy and water, and reduce the greenhouse gases. That's in a global level, and I'm sure this is very challenging. And as mentioned by Manuel, we have to have a pilot project everywhere to be visited and copied. And I think this is very important. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Salah. Hopefully we can see things coming on the ground for this COP, the COP for implementation. And my last question is to Sarah. Later today, your organization will be doing a deep dive into climate resilient housing. What are your key points of discussion around disaster-proof climate resilient housing?
Sure, just in quick summary, I'll give you a sneak peek, but first we're going to talk about how there's a business case for resilience. We know that if people can fix their existing home, it's 23% of what it would cost to build new. We also know that resilience and retrofitting are good for the environment, so we can save 60% of the embodied carbon in a building versus building new if we can maintain the materials, and that's how we can stop more mangroves and other resources from being exploited. And then number 3, we're going to need to work together in order to get there. And so we're going to lay out a pathway for what that can look like and how our climate resilience initiative actually gets at the heart of that, and how we bring together experts like my mayor friend from Mozambique and others from around the world to share the very best ideas so that we can progress this agenda and make all of our families more resilient.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think, do we have time for questions?
What time is the session?
It's 4:45 right here. So do we have time? Okay, 1 minute. Anyone has any question?
I'm curious from the mayor's perspective, what kinds of funding you've seen be most successful, the sort of the success stories for you, and then what keeps you up at night in terms of the finance gaps that you see that you are most seeking new funding for?
Actually, my biggest, what keeps me not able of sleeping at night, even during the day, is something probably before your question, is having qualified people to be able of identifying the funding sources available. Because I know that there are funds available, but I don't have in my team enough people to look at those fundings and then see or design projects, the so-called, yesterday I was at a panel with some financial institutions about bankable projects. And the biggest problem that we have is that those on the supply side of the money, I think they're a bit arrogant. They are not prepared to listen to us, to listen to our grievances, and they don't even have time to look at our weaknesses. They think that because they've got the money, they've got the upper end, and they know everything. I think that there is a mutual ignorance from the side of the municipality, at least at the global south and the financial institutions. We do have assets, but those assets are not valued by the financial institutions. They look at the market the way they look at the market with the private sectors or private enterprises. I think they need to change their glasses and look at local government in a different way. They need to value some assets that we do have. And they need to learn our language, local government language. On the other side, we are prepared to learn their language. It's difficult. We are not aiming at transforming, and I think it will not be sustainable to transform local government into financial institutions. That's not our vocation. But so we need probably to come up with special vehicles to be able of speaking the language and be able of preparing the so-called bankable projects. As of now, most cities don't have that capacity, and so we cannot access the available funding. Sorry. You know, you touched at my heart. Sorry. Thank you very, very much for the question.
Thank you to this panel. Thank you very much. I'm sorry to cut you off. Thank you very, very much. I feel like we could have gone on for a lot longer, but we have 2 more fantastic presentations to close us out today. We are going to now see some of these principles that we have heard about for the last 2.5 hours put into practice. We have 2 case studies, and first of all, I'd love to invite Sarah El-Batouti, the founder of eConsult Architecture, sorry if I've said that badly, to come up here and provide a presentation of a resilient and adaptable building project. Nice to meet you, thank you. It's the second button that clicks through.
Hi, everyone. Okay, great. Yeah, so let me, eConsult is a green building strategy company that we established in Egypt. We started off in 2009, and we were not able to register the company because there's no definition for a green building company. So when we started registering, they would say, no, 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 you belong to the Syndicate of Engineers. And then they would say, no, actually, go to the Ministry of Environment. So that loop took a good year until they figured us out. Then they established us as a company with the Ministry of Investment. So we're very unique in that sense because we're not a typical design studio. Then it was the Arab Spring. And we took the opportunity to study during the Arab Spring. And we grew. The company is established by 3 women. We're always talking about why there are so few green buildings in the MENA region, and I spoke about this yesterday. Why are there so few green buildings in Egypt when there's a huge market and a very sophisticated market? And I think today, Dr. Salah said we have lots of materials, we have lots of solutions. We've got the need to build, and we've got the space to build. So why are we not building? And we set out to just answer this question, but answer on the ground. Okay. So we do 3 things. We design, we strategize, or we justify to our clients why they should go green. And that's also part of our job that we never expected we had to do, because we thought it makes sense to build green. And the third one is that we have an advocacy edge, because there's a new kind of practice. We're defined as the 4th sector. So we work a bit like an NGO and then a bit like a private sector company, and we have to advocate. We literally open up the market and step into it. Okay. And we know that we're stuck in a vicious cycle. You know, things are becoming expensive, supply chains are becoming expensive, rating systems are not adapting as much, rating systems are not localized. You know, I have a burden as an architect when I walk into a boardroom and I say the word lead, and then I have to worry about the devaluation of the pound, and I've got to worry about the supply chain of not getting things in, and then I have the premiums from the contractor. It's a lot to ask an architect to justify all this. And quite frankly, none of us have the academic training when we are in university that we have to be salesmen and lawyers and litigation experts in order to design a building. So we started really small. We started really tiny, and we never started in Egypt because no one wanted us. So this is one of our most successful projects. We just said, we're going to localize the model as much as possible. This is a little cafe pavilion that is in Palma, and we got the strangest brief, but we were so small that we're the only company that accepted it. The client came to us and said, I want a small building, and I want it out of the way in 3 years. And you set your ego aside. So this building, we looked around in that area, we looked at the factories in that area, and apparently, very, very close to us, there was a factory that was exporting refrigerator casings, and when it had a small bump or something wrong with the refrigerator cases, it wouldn't go into the market. So we built this entire building out of discarded refrigerator casings. And we just thought, why not? That's a recycle. I'm using something that somebody doesn't want, and it looks slick. And obviously, all the wood around was built using recycled wood, but the building itself kind of worked, and we never put it to the test. The majority of our R&D in this was, how do we stick this stuff together? You know, and is it going to get too hot? But it worked, it worked. It's not hot, it's not noisy, it's really easy to clean, and we didn't cry over it when they removed it. It was fine. And that kind of thought started growing with us as a team. So this is another company in China, and Wind, basically, they manage different hotels. And they produce a huge volume of waste, construction waste and material waste. So what we did was to take the wood waste that they produce and develop with them a corporate manual, and this became their identity. In every single one of their offices, they now have these rooms. Again, a different school, a school that has needs for indoor air quality. We looked at different materials that we can apply, and so on and so forth. So what I'm trying to say here is there are no rules, and there's so much that can go into the R&D, and we look at localizing everything. This is one of our very novel projects. When we were thinking, why do green buildings not take off in Egypt? And why is it so difficult to build here? It's because they're not affordable. And the market of 58 million Egyptians that live in a decent life initiative don't hire architects. By the way, it's an entire untapped market. We're seen as a luxury service. So if the market is not going to encompass our sector, it makes sense for us to change and evolve and go to them. And that's what we did. So we decided to build our first village that's certified, later on carbon neutral, in an off-grid community in the middle of the Western Desert for 120 people. It was us. We used to go to the desert, to the community, and we decided to make the community design with us. For cooling, we reached up to 10-degree cooling without mechanical assistance, using angles, lifting the building 10 centimeters off the ground, using particular methods of changing the furniture of the room seasonally, because it reaches 45 degrees, 50 degrees sometimes, and then in the same day it's 10 degrees. How do you make people comfortable in that? I don't know, but the local community does. And they were really hostile against us coming in. We had all sorts of difficulties working with them at the beginning. But then it got easier because we integrated them into the process, and they were working on the construction site. So it generated work as well, which is what they were talking about earlier. So this is it when it's built. We got this kind of stone. It's called Hagar Arun, all the way from Fayoum. It has a wonderful thermal quality. It's very reflective. It's very cool all the time. The building itself looks the way it is because it's got a lot to do. It's got, the client, it's got the climate, it's got the budget, it's got the energy or lack of energy on the grid, and therefore the architecture comes later on. And we think that these kinds of genuine buildings are going to start becoming more and more frequent in under heat stress. We're now working on another project for a community of 2,000 people in Baharaya village as well. A lot of what we're trying to do is to explore having affordable and accessible building become the #1 product in the industry. Because at the end of the day, it still remains very, very high-end when we talk about green buildings, Apple, Amazon, all of that. It doesn't look like our income situation, and it doesn't look like a developing economy, and it doesn't look young, and it doesn't look like you come from the desert. So why is this the reference point? And that's when we always look onto the rating systems and the localizations of the rating systems. So a product like Tajid, we are definitely, subscribers, although you said that you made one for now for decent life, so we want to look into that. And how are we going to implement Tajid on this kind of level building? This is a hybrid. We've got an EDGE registered school in this project, but also the rest of it is Tajid communities. And it's this mix-up, it's this selection. So what I'm trying to say is that simplifying what the economy needs. I mean, this is a really interesting brief because I got the price of the unit, and then they told me, go and do whatever architecture you want. It's great that, you know, the developer is thinking that's the price of the apartment and this is how much it is. How much can I save? And it's true with the materials, you can reach up to 25 and 24 degree cooling. Now we're really squeezing our brains with the team and also considering how to make the tiniest, most efficient house that is suitable for rural communities in Egypt. Last thing is, last year we embarked on creating the first green guidelines for rural communities that are authored for non-practitioners. Because again, I know how much we can engage with rural communities, and it's quite limited. And we developed something called the People's Brief. And these are our clients. These are the people at the center of the SDGs that we want to do, and therefore the products have to come out. And then we started looking at how do we apply the SDGs on the household. What would it look like? We have 8 chapters. It's quite a hefty document, like 150 pages worth of guidelines that have been extracted from the community. As you can see, all of the illustrations in the green guidelines are actually the real community house in Upper Egypt, Lower Egypt. There is nothing that is alien to what is existing. It's just making it, work better. And when we applied this rating system, this guidelines, we thought we'd put it to the test. And so this year, we've been working on certifying the first green community village. Successfully, we got the certification from the Egypt Green Building Council, and it's the first of its kind. And I just want to end by, the case for doing this kind of stuff requires a lot of work, and I think the architects now that are using the case studies are moving a lot faster, and I think the financial sector has to move on with us. There needs to be investment in intelligent systems in buildings, because we have to move on from calling a building green just because it's a building with a couple of solar panels on top of it. It needs to perform a lot more. And I'm really, really hopeful that we can export this prototype that you were talking, expand it, upscale it, and this experience, this guideline can become like a content page. And every community in different countries can apply into that content page. So thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Sarah. This is incredible and very inspiring, and I understand how much it's very challenging working on this in Egypt. And I would also like to congratulate you and Egypt Green Building Council on the first certified village, first village in Aswan. This is an incredible achievement. Thank you so much for this. And now please let me introduce Dragan Aruta from Passive House. He will be joining us virtually. Welcome, Dragan.
Hello, everyone, and greetings from the Passive House Institute and myself from a warm day in Germany. It's great to be here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Dragos. Thank you.
Perfect. So I can start whenever everybody is ready.
Thank you.
Maybe by introducing myself, I am an architect and building consultant working at the Passive House Institute for the past 10 years. And I have been involved in numerous projects, such as the one that I'm going to present to you now. And my role today is to, first and foremost, subscribe to everything that was discussed. There were some very great subjects and points that have been touched. And also to expand on the solution side of things with regards to our work at the Passive House Institute, which is a research institute in Germany, founded roughly 30 years ago. Where we are an independent institution who have been actively working in developing sustainable building solutions all around the world. Today I have the pleasure to talk to you and to show you a very nice renovation project, an example of resiliency, and also an example of yes, we can, and we know how, and we can help you implement such solutions all over the world. So I will start. First, the location. Sri Lanka is largely known for its growing tourism, beautiful tea plantations, and massive clothing manufacturing industry. This long history in garment manufacturing sometimes raises questions about the working conditions in local factories, mainly because of the hot and humid climate combined with crowded, poorly ventilated, and often noisy working spaces. Therefore, when the opportunity arose to renovate an old factory, Jordan Parnas Digital Architecture and the Passive House Institute jumped on the chance to improve the energy efficiency of the building while drastically to reduce it drastically and design a state-of-the-art passive house factory. The goal was also to achieve the certification and at the same time to improve the working environment. Working with the project team across the globe, as you can see here, the Passive House Institute was tasked with benchmarking, verification and certification of the retrofitted factory in Colombo's district, Katunayake. Colombo is about 7 degrees north of the equator, so very hot and humid climate with average temperatures of around 27 degrees Celsius and a relative humidity of 70 to 80%. So very hot and very humid. The project is located in a low-rise industrial park right next to the airport. And there are some, here are some pictures from before the renovation, of course. There are some trees that provide some shade, but the majority of the building is actually exposed to the sun. Exposed steel structures with few partitions can be seen on the ground floor level in the existing situation, and an open clear span under the roof structure on the first floor of the building. The users in Sri Lanka are accustomed to a greater diversity of interior and exterior configurations, so it's never quite clear when you are outside or inside in the classic traditional building programs. So let's have a look at the design and the feasibility study that we have done. So the Star Garments facility is unique for many reasons. First and foremost, it is the first passive house certified building in Sri Lanka. Second, the project is certified to the EnerPHit standard, which is a standard that was designed for the renovation of existing buildings. And lastly, the project's location is in a hot and humid climate combined with its use as a manufacturing facility. This results in a heightened focus on strategies to reduce gains from the sun as well as from the equipment and occupants. Controlling the humidity in the workspace is not only essential for the passive house certification, but also for ensuring a better thermal comfort for the workers. This presentation actually highlights the important decisions and steps that were taken in the design and building process to actually achieve this very high energy efficiency and comfort. So in 2000,
you've got 1 minute left, if that's okay. So just to push you on to the most exciting part.
I would actually really like to continue. Yes, in 2016, Stephen Winters Associates and PHI conducted a utility analysis of the factory building prior to any renovations to predict and later verify the energy savings of the Innovation Center. As you can see in the cross-section, the building is organized on 2 floors. And at the ground floor level, the perimeter is pulled back up to a full bay in some areas and is dedicated to offices and meeting rooms. The upper floor of the factory is actually the main production area and features a broad column free space where pattern making, cutting, and main sewing areas are designed. The main challenges identified in this feasibility study were the lack of necessary equipment and construction materials, such as energy recovery ventilation units, tapes or airtightness barriers. Moreover, it was quite difficult to establish measured primary energy use and resulted costs as separate from industrial process loads. The occupancy and usage patterns are generally complex and needed to be thoroughly analyzed. After extensive research and multiple calculated variants, the predicted outcomes were a potential reduction of 50% of primary energy and a payback period of 7 years if the load-bearing steel structure were to be reused. So this is practically the energy balance of the primary energy calculation by end use, and we can see that the sensible and cooling sensible cooling and latent cooling demands were pretty high, but considerably reduced after the renovation. So the internal heat gains are actually accounting for 82% of the sensible cooling load, and the load calculations are based on peak loads. So the HVAC system being specified for this project is a variable refrigerant flow with outdoor units, and this allows the system to more efficiently meet the part load conditions. I will try to skip through the techniques faster so that you can
if we could ask you to give us a closing statement, if that's okay. We're just running out of time here in the Buildings Pavilion.
So then I would actually like to show you some nice pictures and to conclude with the finished product, which is a great example of yes, it's possible to renovate and to apply local solutions to buildings all over the world while using the Passive House standard as a benchmark and the Passive House principles as a strategy. Even though the team was international, I think the target was to actually disseminate as much information as possible and knowledge, which is something that we did. And here you can see some the actual measured energy consumption, which is 54% lower than the before renovation measurements. And here are some pictures of how the building is operated right now and the interior conditions with optimal comfort and air and illumination while being actually 50% more efficient. And by next year, no, in 2 years' time, the investment costs are actually paid off due to the large energy savings in this project. And I thank you very much for your attention. And if
impressively done in a short space of time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dragas, and thank you, everyone. Today's session was excellent, and to bring it to a close, please allow me to introduce Dr. Laila Skandar, a politician and entrepreneur, and in Egypt, we consider her one of our
We can make this work. We have solutions for 4 billion people. There are guiding principles that are published by the World Green Building Council. You can find them on their website. The mayor from Mozambique gave us his solutions, nature-based and conventional ones. So he has partnerships with research agencies and multilateral banks. Then we had to address the adaptive and resilient built environment. How do you get there? Karim told us it's a process. It's not a one-time shot, but to accelerate the action, the principles can help us to get data free, get some ideas on nature-based solutions and scale. He was advocating and asked us to do the same. Sunitra from the private sector said that they are now looking at climate responsive design to prevent floods. They use technology. Their companies and designers and architects and contractors sign off on how to do the net zero construction and design by 2030. But they also they give internships and they bring students from universities into their company to learn this new language and new paradigm, because everybody complained, we're not taught this in university, okay? So they're trying to do something about it in the private sector. From Sao Paulo, the problem is huge. You have a metropolitan area of 22 million people, of which 400,000 are farmers, but they're turning the areas that were slums into gardens. I used to be the Minister of Slums in Egypt. I have a question mark on how they do that. But apparently, people who live on geologically risk areas are moved to safer areas, and they convert these into gardens so people don't move back. I want to see that. So, because it's the distance, just a question, where do they go? African cities focus so much on equity. It's not about going green. It's about going people green, keeping their livelihoods, not just low carbon, and collaborating because of the complexity of bringing everybody in one room and listening to them and including all of the voices. Very, very complicated, which I must agree to. So in the fireside chat, it was just wonderful. We had a person from the research community who told us there is finance everywhere. There's money, but how do you get it? Well, why is it not coming? A number of reasons. But they have issued a toolkit, which we hope we will all access. And the context is critical for functioning. That's the policies, right? So what they're trying to do, Omid told us that at IFC, is to screen for all the projects to make sure that for them to qualify for funding from IFC, they have to be aligned with the Paris Agreement. And that should be done by July 2023. They have a resilience index at the IFC. It will be now provided to all banks, not just lending banks, national and commercial. However, Omid told us that banks need hand-holding. They just can't be given these and then qualify for Paris Agreement till I know. That's one thing. He would like to see more grant financing, increase in risk assessments, and wants to make sure that the NDCs actually are translated into investment-ready projects. I've heard that in every single session. 1 minute, okay. So then, good news, good news. Adaptation finance is finally accelerating by 50%, we hope. It is the building of resilience in mitigation finance is creeping in to good science, okay? But there's always a tension between the finance for mitigation, you know that, and adaptation. And so the champions, Flavia, introduced a very important and interesting initiative championed by 3 agencies, UNFCCC, the COP presidency, and the climate champions. Right, 3 agencies. What have they done? They've given us a package of Race to Resilience by 2030. What does it do for us? It gives us solutions and outcomes of what to do, where, and how. It's a finance enabler in the areas of food and agriculture, human settlements, built environment, and then civic participation. Everybody kept saying, include youth. They are not ignorant, they are not impotent, they have ideas, they can speak. Please be responsive politicians. Key takeaways: integrate all of these groups into a forum and open up more spaces, redefine the way forward to include CSOs. They want to drive the vision of government and the private sector, and they want to include what they call the missing majority, 1.2 billion youths. There's call for continuity, not just a one-off thing, a COP27 and we all go home. The last sentence, resilience, adaptation, reconstruction, said, let's make sure that we give people alternatives. When you say, don't use mangrove, don't use this and that, we give alternatives. So then Dr. Salah Al-Hagwer said, there is an alternative. Why are you worried about it? Tons of cement and concrete hanging around everywhere. In fact, the figure he gave was, how many millions, yeah, doctor? I'm looking for it. I mean, a colossal amount of concrete to recycle and reuse. And the case study presented by Sarah actually showed us that with recycled materials you can do a lot. In Egypt, Dr. Salah gave one example of national application in the Tarshid Haya Karima model, and he's promising us that the roof over our heads will do so at the global level. Next steps from Sarah are to go deep dive, resilient business cases that's 23% cheaper to retrofit than build. Thank you.
Leila, that was a fantastic summary. Thank you very much, Leila Iskandar. And thank you very much to all of you for staying with us for 3 hours today. On behalf of myself and Amira at World GBC, Resilience Rising, and the rest of the Building to COP Coalition, thank you very much. We hope you've enjoyed the session. Come back on Monday at 11 o'clock for a session on the circular economy, and on Wednesday for another 3 hour on decarbonisation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.